Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. Today is, or this particular lecture is about some of the other things going on in the early to mid 60s that were not the Beach Boys or the Beatles. And then we're also going to talk about the rise of soul music. So I've sort of grouped these two together. It works pretty well chronologically. Okay, there is no daily assignment for this. So I'm giving you ample time to work on the Billboard listening assignment that you have, in addition to finishing up other daily assignments, and of course, preparing for your final paper. Okay, so as always, let me know if you have any questions about anything. Okay, let's start. So we're going to take a minute to talk about a few trends in Latin music during the 1960s. The last time we checked in on Latin music, it was mambos, and then the imitations that were that came out of mambos, right? We're going to get back to more arguably authentic Latin music, but then there's also going to be some things that are really sort of fusions of other things here as well. So one type of Latin American music that arose in the early 60s was something called Latin soul, more commonly known as boogaloo, which is really just Latin American elements fused with elements of soul. So it's kind of got a Motown vibe or other sorts of types of rhythm and blues fused with some Latin American percussion. A lot of these pieces are highly repetitive, like we've talked about with Latin American music and African American music. A lot of these are in Spanish. So that's kind of unique. And they charted reasonably well at this time. It's a very urban music, typically popular in large metropolitan areas where there would be a large Latin American population. So there are parts of the country that this wouldn't make as much noise on the pop realm, but they still did, as you can see here, pretty well. I've given you two examples. Full disclosure, I'm a big fan of Boogaloo. I think this is just great stuff. So by all means, please check it out. It, again, came out of sort of New York City, large metropolitan areas where there's a large Puerto Rican community, large Dominican community, large Cuban community, and obviously a large African American community. So it all kind of mixes together. The same thing is going to happen with salsa, 15 years later. But in the early 60s, it was Boogaloo. And it's just really fun, danceable, exciting music. So I've uploaded these two charts, Watermelon Man, which has sort of become a standard jazz tune that has been covered by countless people. This one's by Mongo Santa Maria. As you can see, it reached number 10 on the pop charts. So that's 1963. I mean, that's before Beatlemania, but the Beach Boys are charting at that point. And you get some of these unique excursions into Latin music charting as well. And the other one is El Watusi, which is Ray Barretto. That one reached number 17 on the pop charts. The Watusi is actually a dance. We just talked about the twist, right? And how there are songs about the twist, songs called The Twist, and then there are other sorts of songs, Twist and Shout by the Beatles, Let's Twist Again, which is another Chubby Checker song, countless songs like that. The Watusi is a dance. And so El Watusi is the song that you would do the Watusi to, and then there'd be others as well. So pause this video and go check out some Boogaloo. Enjoy Mongo Santa Maria and Ray Barretto. And then come back and we'll talk about some more Latin music. Go. All right. I hope you enjoyed those. Like I said, I think Boogaloo is great. I have a soft spot, a real fondness for that sort of stuff. Other Latin American musics and kind of fusions. The next one would be bossa nova. Bossa novas and sambas came from Brazil around the same time, which is the late 50s, early 60s. And both of those actually fused with jazz to become actually pretty popular. A very specific sort of jazz, which I teach in my jazz history class, was sort of a reaction to how complicated jazz was getting. After the swing era, which we talked about, jazz got really, really complex for a lot of people in this particular type of jazz called bebop. Bebop is really, really complex and difficult music. It's hard for players. It's also difficult for listeners. So as sort of a side effect of that, or it's kind of like as the pendulum swings back and forth, if bebop got really hard over here, the reaction to that is a type of jazz called cool jazz, specifically West Coast cool jazz, which is a lot more mellow, a lot more relaxed. It's sort of a predecessor to smooth jazz, if you've ever heard that term. That's kind of what West Coast cool is. A couple artists from West Coast cool, particularly a tenor saxophone player named Stan Getz. He collaborated with Yao and Astrid Gilberto for an album called Getz Gilberto, which did very well. And the biggest song to come from that in 1963 was the tune Girl from Ipanema. There's other tunes. Desafinato is on there. Corcovado, really great mellow beach tunes in a sense. But the Girl from Ipanema was the biggest hit. And as you can see, the radio-friendly version reached number 5 on the pop charts. So again, 1964, we're talking Beatlemania, and a tune like this that featured Astrid singing The Girl from Ipanema, featured Stan Getz playing a little saxophone. I do want to clarify, this is the radio version, and I've uploaded it for you. The album version is longer. It's about twice as long. The Yao Gilberto first sings in Portuguese. Then his wife Astrid sings what I believe to be is the same verse in English. And then it goes into an extended tenor saxophone solo by Stan Getz, because it really is a jazz record. But they had all the makings of a hit. So what they did, and you will hear when you listen to the version I uploaded, they actually cut the Portuguese verse. They go straight to the English verse. And even then, they sort of cut it up a little bit. So there's a small saxophone thing sort of in the middle, coming back to the voice. So they did quite a bit of editing to make it more radio friendly. That still reached number 5 on the pop charts in 1964. So go check out the Getz Gilberto recording of Girl from Ipanema. I think you'll find it very mellow and relaxing and enjoyable. All right, so go check that out and then come back. Go. Okay, welcome back. The last sort of Latin fusion thing of the 60s we're going to talk about is a very unique hybrid known as a mariachi, which is Mexican mariachi music combined with American popular song, basically. And the number one purveyor of this sort of music was Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass Band. You should ask, if you have the opportunity to, ask your grandparents if they're familiar with Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, if they have any of these records laying around. There's a good chance they might. These albums, which you kind of might be surprised, did really well. They had over 10 albums in the top 10 between 65 and 68. I've uploaded 2 tunes for you, The Lonely Bull and A Taste of Honey. The Lonely Bull sort of opens with sound effects of a bullfight. These songs don't necessarily have any vocals. Herb Alpert was actually a trumpet player. So The Lonely Bull, for example, is an AABA popular song. So is A Taste of Honey, in a sense. And so Herb Alpert's going to play the tune on his trumpet. In fact, on The Lonely Bull, the A sections are him playing the melody. Do 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 da 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 dee da 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 da, that. And then the B section, the bridge, is a guitar solo playing the melody, and it comes back, of course, to the A. So it's again a fusion of like a mariachi sound, along with American popular song forms. And again, you might think, what a strange collaboration. But it did pretty well in the mid-60s. You will find through the 1960s Billboard assignments, through the 1970s Billboard assignment, that there was a lot more variety sort of on the charts at that point. Nowadays, it seems to be much more homogenized, and there are certain types of music that make the charts consistently, and other music does not. Back in the 60s and 70s, it seemed much more diverse. Okay, so go check out the two Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass Band tunes, The Lonely Bull and A Taste of Honey, and then come back and we'll start talking about more things. Go. All right. So those three, again, sort of pop music versions of Latin American types of music, right? Boogaloo, right? The mariachi stuff. Bossa novas are definitely Brazilian and authentic. They just fused with jazz to be a little more popular. Okay. Now we're going to talk about some episodes in country music in the early to mid 60s. By the late 60s and 70s, country music will start to change a little bit. But during this era, early to mid 60s, a lot of country musicians started to approach a new sound where they eliminated all the sounds of honky tonk, which was like the pedal steel guitar, that really syrupy, characteristic country music sound, and violins, fiddle playing and that kind of stuff. They got rid of those things and they replaced them with pop sounding vocals and lush string sections. If you'll remember from previously, we just recently spoke about Phil Spector and the wall of sound that Phil Spector was trying to create. A lot of reverb, a lot of doubling of instruments, these teenage symphonies, right? And then I walked you through Motown and how on some Motown records, like My Girl, for example, they have the same string symphonies and this sort of stuff. How Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, particularly on the Pet Sounds album, was trying to capture the same essence. Excuse me. Oh, so sorry. Trying to capture the same essence of the Phil Spector wall of sound, right? That is the sound of the early 60s. That is what was popular in the early 60s. So once again, here's some country musicians who are on the periphery for the most part. Country's not mainstream necessarily, but they're going to adopt a lot of pop music sounds to make their records more popular, all right? This was actually known as countrypolitan or the Nashville Sound. The term Nashville Sound was also sort of revived in the late 80s with Garth Brooks, Shania Twain, people like that. And it's really, again, it's making pop-friendly country music. You could argue that the majority of pop music, the majority of country music nowadays has got that same sort of essence. They're trying to capture a pop country vibe or a country rock vibe, still very much trying to reach a popular audience. So in a sense, that is still a Nashville sound also. But this is when the term was coined in the early to mid 60s, okay? I've given you two examples of the Nashville sound. One is Patsy Cline's version of Crazy. Crazy was actually the first hit song written by Willie Nelson. But here, Patsy Cline had a huge hit with it, as you can see, reached number 9 on the pop charts. So these records did so well on the country charts, they crossed over and scored really high on the pop charts as well, which is kind of rare for some country music. But again, this is country music that is actively seeking out a pop sound. No pedal steel guitars, no fiddles, or at least they play a very limited role. And they are replaced instead by string sections, by choirs, by really polished background vocals. The recording quality is really high, all that kind of stuff. So go listen to Patsy Cline's Crazy, and you're going to hear a lot of sort of like doo-woppy vocal backgrounds, the same sort of vocal quartets you would have heard on Elvis Presley records, honestly, that kind of stuff. The covers of Pat Boone. She's the lead singer, but there's clearly a vocal quartet or something supporting her. Very much of a pop sound, okay? Eddie Arnold's Make the World Go Away, number 6 on the pop charts in 1965. That is a full-blown Phil Spector teenage symphony type sound. There's a great big choir that sings along. There's a very lush, romanticized string section there. It's very clear. and you'll hear that if you compare these to honky tonk records, if you compare this to Hank Williams or Kitty Wells and Hank Thompson, these records are very much night and day. So go check out the examples of the Nashville Sound: "Crazy" by Patsy Cline and "Make the World Go Away" by Eddie Arnold, and then come back and we'll start talking about soul music. Okay, go. Okay, so earlier we discussed how the R&B chart was renamed soul in 1969. And the charts are, those sort of reactions are usually late, because soul music very much started early on in the early 60s. You have this transition from rhythm and blues to this really pop friendly Motown sound, which many people also consider soul, or this other stream of soul, very gospel infused, very rock and roll infused. That was taken by Aretha Franklin, Ray Charles. We'll talk about James Brown also before he moved even further into what we call funk. We'll touch in on funk later on. So I'm going to guide you through sort of a couple of people, Ray Charles in particular, and how soul develops in its relationship to this other music. Okay, so soul music was sort of great. It was great timing for it in a sense that, again, 63 and 64, you have the final passage of civil rights legislation. These people have been working hard to do this. The Black community has been working very hard to draw awareness to their plight, to segregation, to racism, to these sorts of things. And so this music is, in a sense, a soundtrack to that. It corresponds very well to the message they're trying to get across, and the strength of these people and the spirit of these people and that kind of stuff. And that's what you get in soul music. Soul music is primarily Black. There are a couple of white soul artists. Oftentimes that's called blue-eyed soul, which is, just very clear blue eyes, Caucasian, so blue-eyed soul. Singers like Dusty Springfield, who is actually British. She was very much a blue-eyed soul singer. Her version of "Son of a Preacher Man" is as good as anybody's. The Everly Brothers would be considered blue-eyed soul. People, a couple artists like that. But generally, the music is Black artists and for a Black audience. But again, by this point, it's all sort of coming out in the wash very much, right? So again, combining gospel singing, that tradition, rock and roll, which is obviously newer, and rhythm and blues all together to create this new, very fun, very exciting, very passionate music. Okay. A sort of pinnacle, a main contributor of soul would be Ray Charles. Born Ray Charles Robinson, he lost his sight when he was 6 years old. He led a jazz trio in Seattle in the 1940s. He was actually a really good piano player. But this parallels Nat King Cole, actually. Nat King Cole was a pop singer, had a jazz trio, but people weren't that interested in his piano playing. They were more interested in his voice, right? This parallels how Elvis sort of was modeled after Frank Sinatra. Well, Ray Charles was sort of set up to model after Nat King Cole. Also played piano, led a jazz trio. But he started to bring in gospel elements, rhythm and blues elements, and that was what was hot at that time. So it just took off, and the jazz trio part sort of fell apart, right? He has a nickname as the Genius of Soul, sometimes just known as the Genius. Okay. Early on, Ray Charles was a rhythm and blues performer, signing with Atlantic Records, recording rhythm and blues type of tunes. So jump blues songs, very much like Louis Jordan. If you want to go Google "Mess Around," it could have been done by Louis Jordan and his Timpani Five, or sort of blues crooner ballads like Charles Brown when we talked about rhythm and blues. That's a tune that I chose and I would play sometimes in class. It should have been me, and these are their chart positions on the rhythm and blues chart, not on the pop chart, but on the rhythm and blues chart. So Ray Charles was doing standard rhythm and blues things in the early 50s. Okay. By mid to late 50s, he started to have a lot of hits, a lot of number one hits on the rhythm and blues charts. I did upload the tune I Got a Woman, and I choose that one specifically for two reasons. Number one, you're in all likelihood, you may recognize the tune because it has been sampled prominently. A particular part of it is sampled in a very well-known hip-hop tune of the last, 8 years or so, 10 years. So you may recognize where part of that came from, and this is the original, of course. But it also shows you the gospel influence that it came from. So for the Ray Charles version, he sings, "I got a woman way over town who's good to me," right? And then it's a 12-bar blues, so you get the same. Well, it's not a 12-bar blues; it's a variation on the 12-bar blues. But then you get the same line of text: "I got a woman who's way over town. She's good to me," right? That song, he took the music and essentially the melodies and everything from a gospel song called "Must Be Jesus," and he gave the background vocal parts that used to sing "Must Be Jesus, Must Be Jesus." He gave that to his horn section, and then the original lyrics are, "There's a man going around taking names." And so it's a gospel song. It's very, sacred and pious and religious. Ray Charles turned that into "I Got a Woman way over town who's good to me," which is very much secular, has a little bit of the innuendo that we've come to know and sort of rely on in a lot of these rhythm and blues records. This caused a little bit of controversy at the time, but Ray Charles did have a number one hit out of it. I have uploaded both Ray Charles' "I've Got a Woman" and the Southern Tones singing "Must Be Jesus." I would like you to listen to both of them just to hear exactly where Ray Charles got the material for "I Got a Woman" and how he just manipulated a little bit. Okay. Other tunes: "Marianne," "Drown My Own Tears," and then a song called "What I'd Say," which crossed over and reached number 6. And that's when he started to have a lot more pop chart success. So please go listen to "I Got a Woman" and "Must Be Jesus," and then come back for more Ray Charles. Go. Okay. Hopefully you recognized where that "She Gives Me Money," where that came from, right, in the Ray Charles tune. Okay. So after having Ray, let me preface this by saying Ray Charles' success and career path is very similar to Elvis's in a sense, because Elvis started on Sun Records and then he gained enough popularity, he was signed to a major record company, right? And now Ray Charles has done the same thing. He was on Atlantic, and then he started to have some chart success, and so then he was signed by CBS Records, which is a major record company. And then his records start to change because you no longer have to do these sort of live one-take performances with your 7 or 8 piece band in the studio and let's see what we can capture. Now you have the resources of a major record company, and you can make these really polished recordings with string sections, with editing, with all this kind of stuff. And that's what he starts to do. So I've also provided links to "Georgia on My Mind," which was his first number one hit on the pop charts. It was number 3 rhythm and blues, number 1 on the pop charts. That's an old Tin Pan Alley song written by Tin Pan Alley songwriters, Hoagy Carmichael and Stuart Gorell, from 1930. But the Ray Charles version is sort of the definitive version of this song. And it's full of the lush strings, and there's woodwinds in there, and background vocals, and it's you know what record it's like? It actually reminds me a lot of Eddie Arnold's "Make the World Go Away," but obviously more soulful, and Ray Charles, right? But it's kind of the same elements. And then "Hit the Road Jack" is more of an R&B, old classic R&B tune, but it's still very well produced. It has all the makings and exciting things of a Ray Charles record, and that was also number 1. Okay, so Ray Charles by this point is having a lot of pop success, and he goes to his record company in the early 60s, and he says, "I want to make a country record," which for a black artist is unusual. and CBS was resistant. But Ray actually grew up in the South. He grew up in Florida. He heard not only rhythm and blues music and learned rhythm and blues music, but he also grew up on a lot of rural white country music. Again, very similar to Elvis. Just because it's rural white music doesn't mean that poor black kids can't hear it and play it and imitate it and come up with their own versions. And that's what Ray Charles did here. But he ended up making more soulful, in a sense, sounds. So he took these country tunes, but he gave them the Ray Charles treatment. Okay. So, for example, the biggest hit off that record is I Can't Stop Loving You, which, as you can see, Ray Charles had a #1 pop hit and a #1 R&B hit from it. It was a monstrous hit. And again, big choir, string section, really well recorded with all the full forces of CBS Records. I've uploaded both the Ray Charles version of I Can't Stop Loving You and the original, which was written by the country artist Don Gibson. Don Gibson's version only reached #7 on the country charts. It did not cross over onto the pop charts. And so here in 1962, less than 10 years or around 10 years when we were talking about major white artists and major record companies doing covers of black rhythm and blues small artists or small record labels and profiting off of them, Pat Boone, Joanne Campbell, all that kind of stuff. Now the tables have completely turned. It helps that it's Ray Charles. But you have a black artist in Ray Charles taking a country song and making an entire album of country music and doing much, much better than the originals, which in this case were done by white country artists. So the times are a-changing in a sense, and we're definitely moving forward. So go check out Georgia on My Mind, how lush the recording is. Compare that to some of the earlier Ray Charles things that I posted, like I Got a Woman, right? Hit the Road Jack is a great tune if you want to check that out. And then listen to both versions of I Can't Stop Loving You and see what Ray Charles did to the original song, how he arranged it and how they recorded it and all that kind of stuff. All right. So go check out, please, all of those Ray Charles things and then come back. Go. Okay. Welcome back. I would like to do an entire class on Ray Charles, actually. Outstanding musician. You can't do him justice in a half an hour. I can't even talk about it. It's just fantastic. I kind of get the same vibe with James Brown. I'm a big fan of funk, and James Brown was the innovator of funk music. We'll talk about funk specifically when we get to the 70s, but I'll give you sort of the transition here. James Brown had a bunch of nicknames. He was the Godfather of Soul, Soul Brother #1, and the hardest working man in show business. The text that I use or used to use in the class said that, quote, no other single musician influenced the sound and style of black music as much as James Brown. That's a pretty loaded, bold statement. I might not be willing to go out on that limb that much, but James Brown's records, particularly his funk records, particularly a tune called Funky Drummer, have been sampled more than any others in early hip hop and moving forward. The whole innovation of funk music coming from James Brown, just extremely influential. So a pretty giant figure here. Okay, James Brown, just like Ray Charles, started out as a rhythm and blues performer. And then he sort of evolves into a soul performer and then a funk performer. His very first record was very much indicative of his pleading style of singing. James Brown had a gift where he could make an entire song out of like 2 lines of text. And just the way he would deliver it and the repetition and everything like that, he didn't need a whole lot of material to create a great song. And Please, Please, Please is actually a really good example of that. He sings the words please, please. He's pleading with his lady, please, please, and that's like 2.5 minutes of the song is just him saying please a lot. A rhythm and blues ballad, clinging obsessively to the words. All right. I've uploaded Please, Please, Please. Go check it out. It's early James Brown, and then I'll give you a couple other James Browns after that. So go check out Please, 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 and come back. Go. All right. So James Brown, again, had a lot of success on the rhythm and blues chart early on, but he didn't have a whole lot of crossover success. It took a while. As you can see, Please, 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 really popular on the rhythm and blues charts, number 5, 105 on the pop charts. So pretty far out there, okay? James Brown and his famous Flames had 10 top 10 rhythm and blues hits between 1956 and 1964. So that 8-year span, he was doing pretty well on the rhythm and blues charts, but not so much on the pop charts. The highest song he had during this almost decade was Prisoner of Love, which reached number 18. Okay, so James Brown was very much a black artist to a black audience, just chipping away, and not having a lot of crossover success until 1965. So mid to late 60s, James Brown started to have a lot more pop success. Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, I Got You, It's a Man's World. Again, there's sort of the Please, Please, Please vibe right there. I Got the Feeling, Cold Sweat, right? There's a good chance you recognize some of these tunes, in particularly I Got You, which I did upload for you. You can see these were all number 1 R&B hits, and they scored very well on the pop charts. I Got You, also known as I Feel Good, right? That was a number 3 pop chart. So go check out I Feel Good or I Got You, I Feel Good. You probably recognize it, and that's the direction James Brown is moving in. Go listen to that, and of course, come back again. Go! Okay. I hope you liked it. I love that tune. So now we're in the late 60s. James Brown has been at it for 16, 17 years for the most part. And again, to sort of take the temperature of the nation, of a movement, right? So in the early 60s, they passed the civil rights legislation, but there was still things to be, fighting for in the black community. There's still subtle forms of racism and segregation in the late 60s, and arguably there are now as well. So James Brown became like this really well-known pillar of strength to the black community and black music in general. In fact, there's a story that says the night Martin Luther King was assassinated, James Brown was scheduled to play a concert in Boston. And they were going to cancel sort of all these things and, have a police presence in all these major cities and whatever. James Brown went to the mayor of Boston and said, Mr. Mayor, listen to me, trust me when I say this, I can keep your city safe. Let me do the concert. And what you should do is you should broadcast it live over the local television networks. He goes, people will stay home, they'll watch me and my band perform, and you'll have a safe night. And so after figuring out, the contract situations, they did that. And thousands of people tuned in to see James Brown perform. And Boston was the safest major city in the country the evening that Martin Luther King was killed. So James Brown just had this dynamic power and sort of leadership in the community. He was great at it. So to sort of coincide with that, there's very much like a proud Black Power sense. This isn't necessarily a militant Black Power, Black Panther thing from the late 60s, but very much sort of a pride thing. And he recorded this song that many people consider to be the first rap. And I uploaded it for you. As you listen to it, he's very much rapping. He's talking the story instead of actually singing it. But he has this very communal thing where the kids are shouting back. He says, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud." And the kids say, "I'm Black and I'm proud." It's all this great stuff. This was number 1 on the rhythm and blues charts, number 10 on the pop charts, which is really quite impressive for a song that could be interpreted in any number of ways, particularly by a white audience, right? And as I mentioned before, Brown's records, particularly a tune called Funky Drummer, has been sampled to hundreds of times in hip hop recordings since the mid 70s. So go check out Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, and then come back and we're going to touch on Aretha Franklin. Ready? Go. All right. Here we are with Aretha Franklin. This will be how we will wrap up our soul music discussion. Aretha Franklin, the late, great Aretha Franklin. I actually haven't updated my notes. She has passed away. I can do that later. She was known as the Queen of Soul. And she, like a lot of African-American soul artists, gospel artists, was formerly a gospel artist, sort of came out of the church. Her father was a very well-known reverend, and she sang in the choir. She played piano, actually, and played organ. Her sister, Irma Franklin, was also relatively popular, but not nearly to the scope of Aretha Franklin. And she had her heyday in the late 60s into the early 70s, had a ton of really big hit records. Aretha Franklin was actually discovered as a teenager, and she was signed to Columbia Records, which was a major record label, and they wanted to turn her into a singer of American popular songs and jazz-type standards. She made a few records singing songs of Gershwin, Cole Porter, stuff like that. It didn't really take off like they had expected. So when her contract ended with Columbia, she signed up with Atlantic. So she went from major label actually to more of an independent label. She went the other way. But at that point, she found her, her voice and the music she was meant to record, and had just a tremendous amount of hits. 13 million sellers and 13 top 10 pop hits. Very intense delivery, very powerful. She wrote a lot of her songs. She was actually a great piano player. During a concert, she would sit down at the piano and play a couple things as a soloist as well. Just an amazing performer, the late, great Aretha Franklin. Anyway, the one tune you probably all know of Aretha Franklin is a tune called Respect. And I've actually uploaded two versions of Respect because Aretha Franklin's version is a cover. The original Respect was written and recorded by Otis Redding. And obviously, this is sort of like the Elvis and the Big Mama Thornton versions of Hound Dog. They have to come from different perspectives, knowing what the song is about, right? So that's what happens here. Otis Redding, when he wrote it, he's asking his lady for some respect. He's working hard. I'm coming home. Can I get some respect? This is obviously flipping that around. And Aretha Franklin singing about receiving some respect, getting some respect from her man, which was very well timed. We are in the late 60s here. There's very much the sort of the rise of sort of women's liberation sorts of movements and movements in that sort of thing. We're no longer in the 50s where women were expected to be secretaries or flight attendants or mothers only, right? Now they're right on the cusp of doing more, and more opportunities are being opened up to them. From a perspective of popularity, this was a very popular song. Number one on the pop charts, number one on the R&B charts. If we back up 10 years to 1957, and we're talking about some of the female performers who were, we talked about before, either Wanda Jackson, Fujiyama Mama, right? Same sort of powerful delivery, but not nearly as popular because the country was not ready for that in 1957, but they were ready for it in 1967. Not only is it a powerful leadership sort of woman, but it's also a powerful Black woman. That goes a long way. It kind of shows how far the country came in 10 years, which is, really nice. Or if you compare it to like the more conservative Patti Page or Connie Francis sorts of songs from the mid to late 50s, this is many, many steps ahead as far as a female presence in popular music. So by all means, go listen to both the Aretha Franklin version of Respect, which chances are you've already heard, and the Otis Redding, the original version, which you are probably less familiar with. And that's it. That is our introduction into soul music. So we covered some Latin things from the 60s, some Latin fusions. We covered some country music, particularly the Nashville Sound and the fusion of country and pop sounds, the Phil Spector sound and things like that. And then we kind of walked you through soul music. I wish I could give you more time for soul music. It could take a whole class, but we got to move on to other things. This being a 3-week class and all, right? So that's it for today. Go listen to both versions of the Respect, and I will see you guys next time. All right. So thanks so much. Have a lovely afternoon or evening or whatever time of the day it is for you. Toodles.